we're all on the same team. Avoid putting parents on the defensive. Wow. So I think we just heard that in the comments. How, how do we begin to avoid, putting parents on the defensive, Deacon Matt?
Well, I think we have to be honest about what the situation we put parents into when they force them to make a choice, based on our scheduling of RE or whatever the ministry is, and it's in competition or seemingly in competition with sports. If we're dealing with parents that, and we know, and the church tells us there's such a great need for adult faith formation in our church, and I mean everywhere around the globe, and that to do good family catechesis, we have to first have good adult faith formation because parents need to be evangelized. Just like we have so many young people in front of us for catechesis that have not yet been evangelized or had that initial evangelization, there are so many parents as well in that same boat. So if you force parents to make a choice, and we're dealing perhaps with unevangelized parents, you're not going to win. That you're not going to have them choose RE, probably, or a youth ministry or whatever the ministry is. And you're going to leave a bad taste in their mouth for having, it's going to feel coercive. It's going to feel offensive. And here we're talking about offense and defense tonight on this sports themed catechist stream show. But I think you get the point I'm making. I think we start at a disadvantage in most situations if we try to force a choice on the parents. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I appreciate that. In a perfect world, there could be often a choice. As a parent of now young adults whose children were involved with sports and cheering and all of that, it's not always just choose this over that. I remember for my daughter, the expense that we paid for her to be a cheerleader.
Mm-hmm.
And the required practices. If you don't come to the practice, then you don't cheer.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's not as easy as saying, okay, I'll go to the class that's at the same time as the practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like what you're bringing up too, which is outcomes, things that are easily seen. So if my daughter goes to cheerleading practice, I see my daughter practice, I see her getting better, and I see the squad, doing well. Maybe they're in competition or something like that. With faith formation, you don't quite see the outcomes. Why? Because this is a growth process. It'd be like, would you rather watch your daughter in cheerleader practice and then eventually go compete at a meet? Or would you like to watch this little plant grow silently and slowly?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I think that's a good point.
Right.
Excuse me, what evidence do we have that there's anything happening in some of our faith formation classes? Because when we ask them and they get in the car, what did they learn? We all know what they say, unless we've addressed that and we've taken some initiative to give them, a check on the way out or some talking points for the parents or a resource that parents can discuss with their children on the way home in the car.
Right.
But that overall faith development is not always that obvious. That's a great point.
It isn't. I mean, the Spirit grows in us in silence and secret. And Jesus tells us, even when we pray to the Father, this is a very intimate, personal thing. Go in your room, lock the door, and the Father who sees you in secret will answer you. So it's a little different. We're kind of comparing apples and oranges when we talk about faith formation and growth in faith versus sports activities and growth in athleticism and competition. But another thing we really want to think about, besides sort of the disadvantage of putting a choice before the parents who might not be evangelized themselves, so that commitment level might not be there, commitment to the faith, that is, we don't want to shame them. And sometimes it comes across that way. Sometimes they hear us as being coercive in our language, especially when we give them ultimatums. Ultimatums, especially in a relationship with God or with the church, which all the theology, all of the saints, and hopefully our clergy as well, and hopefully you and I are saying this is about a relationship of love. This is a community of love and respect. And so when you start putting ultimatums out there, that has quite a bit of dissonance with the message of love and respect. In other words, if you don't attend these many sessions, then you don't get confirmation. Or if you don't come on these days, then your child won't get first communion or whatever it is. It takes different shapes and forms. But ultimatums, in my mind, they don't really have much of a place within the church and within ministry.
It's listening to you makes me think it's a lot like parenting. And we know what's best for our kids. We continue to go through these situations with our young adults. That will probably never end because we're always going to be smarter than them, right? And we know what's best for them. But it's sort of like in our role as catechetical leaders, we see these families who are making not the best decisions, and it's frustrating to us because at this age they should know better. They should know what the best decision is, but it's just not that easy. I love your point that it shouldn't be coercive. We shouldn't put them on the defensive. We shouldn't make them feel like this loving institution of the church. And often we're the face of the church to these people are uncomfortable because of the way we're making them feel about it. We may not like it, but we still have to love them and try to guide them in the right direction.
Absolutely. And this doesn't mean, to all of our ministers out there, this doesn't mean that we can't have standards or expectations. It's just, how do we go about encouraging people to follow them? Notice I didn't say enforce, because I think that leads us down that coercive mindset. But how do we creatively help families navigate what are some of the churches or the parishes or maybe our personal expectations about, you know, their children and navigating faith formation, and what those parental expectations are. In other words, we need to start thinking about how can we accompany families rather than how can we make them conform. Right? Make them conform is a lot different in tone and in intention than how can we accompany. Accompany is how can we include, how can we be creative in that inclusivity, how can we be empathetic, and empathy is that core attitude. Pope Francis talks about this all the time when he talks about accompaniment. Are you willing, do you have the desire to put yourself in that other person's shoes and see the world as they do? That's a scary thing. It's a risky thing. It's risky because you might find yourself agreeing now with how somebody sees things if you're willing to be that vulnerable and try to see things as someone else does. But empathy is a core attitude of accompaniment, and that's what we're going to look at in that last block today. How do we more creatively accompany parents?
Yeah, so Deacon Matt, we've got a lot of great comments coming in. So let's dig into those. Anne Marie says it's difficult, but I scheduled 3 children and their sports around Mass and faith formation, even when we were traveling with a select team in a strange town. You know, kudos to you. That's fantastic.
Man, that's
and
awesome.
Of course, we wish that, you know, more people would attempt that. Joni says, put Christ first and everything else will be given to you. If it's not a priority, if Catholics put our faith first, then children will. I think, Joni, you're tapping into something very important. I think, Deacon Matt, you touched on this. You know, as parents, you know, we have the obligation to, through our actions, you know, establish the way that the children see their faith and value their faith. And so, yeah, we want to help to encourage parents to put faith first.